Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 278. They also said that they realized that his whining was Luigi's signal back to hospital, that he was receiving their signals clearly. Luigi immediately insisted in perfect English that he was not a spy from the hospital. The staff pointed out that of course any spy would deny that he was a spy, and warned him that speaking English might blow his cover. Within 2 days, Luigi stopped pacing, and within 2 weeks he stopped the gibberish and whining. After that, he would occasionally do something crazy, but when he was asked to face in the direction of the hospital to receive signals, he would immediately stop. All Luigi's symptoms, gibberish, speaking Italian, pacing, and whining, were categorized as different aspects of his being a spy for the mental hospital. Since he hated the mental hospital, this was very aversive to him. When he tried to deny it, speaking in English, his denial was also described as part of his being spy. So the only effective way for Luigi to deny the aversive categorization of being a spy for the mental hospital was to stop the behaviors. Limits of recategorization. Despite these wonderful examples, there are limits to recategorization. Calling a car food won't get even the most radical constructivist to eat it, and it would be foolish to try. A recategorization was to fit somehow into the person's worldview, even if it is only accepted as a crazy idea. The idea has to be plausible. For instance, although Luigi denied that he was a spy for the mental hospital, he accepted the possibility that someone could be such a spy. If you look around, you will find that some people categorize many events very differently than you do. Other people pay lots of money to do things that would be horribly unpleasant for me, because I categorize them differently. Most people would agonize over spending a couple of years writing a book, but I have enjoyed learning from a project that I hope will also be useful to others. So the opportunities of recategorization to fit a particular person are much greater than most of us usually imagine. Most of the time, we don't need to worry about limitations of recategorizing. We need to worry about our limitations in thinking of recategorization that might work. For instance, once Virginia Satir worked with a woman who had been abused by her father when she was young. He had beaten her severely with a bullwhip, then took her to her grandparents' house, dumped her, and never came back. Virginia's recategorization was that abandoning her in this way was the father's ultimate gesture of love. He realized he was out of control, so he left her at the grandparents' house and never saw her again to avoid any chance of hurting her further. Personally, I think that Satir's categorization of the father was pretty unlikely. But it was acceptable to the woman, and it allowed her to feel more resourceful about herself and her painful past, and move on with her life. Chloe Maddens, a strategic family therapist, describes her work with a suicidal man. Recently, I was asked by a businessman friend to do a consultation with one of his clients who told him he was planning to commit suicide. In our first appointment, I asked this overweight, sad-looking man how I could help him. He told me that he came from a poor, uneducated family, and he had been the first one in the family to get a college education. Success and hard work had always been central in his life. Then he explained that he's been laid off a year ago and was in such despair over not being able to find work that he was considering suicide. Before reading further to find out what Maddens did, pause to think about how you might help this man recategorize his situation in order to change his depression. You are going to have to explain this better to me because I don't understand it, I said. You are saying you are going to kill yourself because you are not working. That's strange. Could you explain, please? He looked puzzled and replied, work is very important to a person's self-esteem. I feel worthless. You're going to have to explain that better, I said. I still don't get it. He smiled a little, not sure whether I was joking. I'm serious, I said. I'm quite a bit older than you, a child of the 60s. In my generation, nobody wanted to work. We were proud of not working. We wanted to tune in and drop out. So what's so great about work that you want to kill yourself because you don't have it? He was looking at me as if I'd come from outer space. He said, I always thought work was important. I have a strong work ethic. So what was the work you did? I am an engineer and I always worked in plants manufacturing weapons. Oh, great, I said. So the world is a better place because you don't work. By now he was smiling broadly. I said, look, eventually you will go back to work. That is inevitable. And then you will look back on this period when you could have done so many things and had so much fun with regret, because you won't have time anymore to do the things you want to do. Do you have a girlfriend? No, he said. I don't have any money. Since when is love related to money? I asked. If I were you, I'd find a woman and go to the beach, the park, the mountains, go to the zoo. He called me the next day at my office and said, I just wanted to let you know that it's a beautiful day. It is a beautiful day. Yes, I agreed. And I am at the zoo, he continued. And then he paused with a woman. I said, great. I am at my office, working. He wrote me a letter a year later to tell me he was happy and working and to thank me for our conversation. Some people are reluctant to try a recategorization because of their fear that a client might reject it. When you try a recategorization that doesn't work, you can always say, oh, so that way of thinking about it doesn't fit for you, and drop that one and try another one, as Virginia Satir always did. If a client clearly rejects what you said, you can simply apologize and follow up with, "I don't know why I said that. I guess I just had a brain freeze." Does that even happen to you? If a client gets upset or angry, you can step aside physically. Talk to the space that you were occupying a moment ago and blame it on someone else as a way of joining with the client and regaining rapport. "Damn, I knew that wouldn't fit for you, but my supervisor insisted that I try it." Or, "I read about that in an article, and I don't think it would work, but I just had to find out if it would fit for you." Humor and creativity. There are many kinds of humor. Much of what is considered humorous is making fun of others in ways that diminish them. Some humor is directed at pompous and self-important people, cutting them down to size. A lot of stand-up comedy, even when it is clever, is essentially a scornful putting down of others' ignorance or stupidity, something that the target of this kind of humor may not found humorous at all. Unfortunately, putting others down is found in all cultures and appears to be an expression of social competition and joking for status and importance. It is much easier to draw attention to others who are less intelligent than you are than it is to demonstrate your own intelligence. A lot of other humor involves talking about forbidden topics like sex and aggression, and the enjoyment seems to be mostly the bold expression of what shouldn't be talked about. A small example of cultural bravery or rebellion that can also be used to rise status. But there is another kind of humor that is different. It is light, enjoyable, surprising, creative, and about all of humanity rather than at the expense of some target group. While it might involve forbidden topics, it is the cleverness rather than the sex or aggression that makes it funny, and the unexpected punchline invites us to think of all things in new ways. When we examine the structure of this kind of humor in jokes and comics, we find that the patterns of humor contain exactly the same kind of changes in scope and category that we have been exploring. And these patterns are also the same as the experience of creativity and problem solving. As someone put it, there is really no difference between ha 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 and ha 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 ha. Either there is a scope shift that results in a category shift, or there is a direction or implicit recategorization that changes the meaning of an event. There is even some experimental research that indicates how jokes and laughter change how our brain functions. Laughter balances the activity of the two hemispheres of the brain, as measured by the absence of binocular rivalry. When horizontal stripes are presented to one eye and vertical stripes are presented to the other eye, subjects typically see one pattern or the other, switching back and forth between the two. Depressed people switch back and forth much more slowly than normal subjects. Only occasionally do people see both patterns at once, resulting in a crosshatch, and this is presumed to indicate balance between the activity of the two hemispheres, with neither one predominating. Laughing at a joke, but not artificial laughter, results in seeing the crosshatch that indicates balanced activity. At the moment of shifting categories, what Arthur Koestler called bisociation occurs, some element in the joke is associated with two different categories simultaneously. Something that was understood as a member of one category is suddenly understood as a member of quite different category. There is always a point of ambiguity, what I call the hinge of the joke, when an old categorization fades and a new one emerges out of the mist. For example, the most common kind of cartoon uses a series of 2 or 3 frames to set up situations that we can easily categorize. Since we know by the format that it is a cartoon and are expecting something to shift, we may wonder, what's going on? Then a final frame provides a larger or different scope. The last frame typically includes some information that was not included in the earlier smaller frames. Sometimes the words draw attention to something that was present earlier, but not very noticeable. This new information changes the way we categorize it. For instance, in one of my favorites, one man is fishing and another is sitting nearby in the lotus position. When the fisherman asks what the other man is doing, he replies, "I am expanding my awareness." When the fisherman says, "I don't think it's working," the man in lotus position says, "Why not?" The fisherman says, "Because you're sitting on my fish hooks." When the change in understanding is clear enough, we smile or laugh at the surprising shift. But even when the content of the cartoon is not very clever, this structural pattern is the most common one that cartoonists use. Scott McCloud's wonderful book, Understanding Comics, is one of the best books I know of for understanding not only comics, but many other fundamental principles of how our minds work. It is also the only book I know that is completely congruent. Everything that he presents about comics is presented in the format of a comic book. Now consider the following joke. What do the following 3 things have in common? Birthdays, anniversaries, and toilets. When you read the punchline, it points out a criterion that is common to all 3 of them, a more general categorization, and one that has the additional ambiguity in the word miss, which is used in a different way for the third item. In the first two, miss is a miss in time, while in the third, it is a miss in space. So what is in common is that men tend to miss them. What do the following three things have in common? Birthdays, anniversaries, and toilets. Men tend to miss them. Since the two items are both members of the category annual events, we naturally think of that category. Then, when we get to toilets, we find that the category no longer fits. Even though we realize that the old category no longer fits, it is usually hard for us to abandon it, and this persistence of the old category makes it difficult for us to think of a new one. If the order of the words were reversed to toilets, anniversaries, and birthdays, we wouldn't have the experience of thinking of a category and then discovering that it didn't fit. We would still be puzzled, of course, but the effect would be quite different. There are many other patterns of humor, of course. One is exaggeration, making an incongruous extreme out of something usual. Another places a common human them in a different context of animals communicating, where it is incongruous or out of place. Whatever the pattern or mechanism, all humor either changes the scope of recategorizes experience, sometimes at the same logical level, sometimes at a lower or higher one. Often, a shift in categorization hinges on auditory ambiguity, and ambiguous word or phrases has two very different meanings. These are often seen in the headlines of the articles in newspapers, because they have to leave out words to fit the space. On the next page are some actual headlines collected by Columbia Journalism Review. Filter to duplicate Miss Earth's fatal flight. Flyer to duplicate Miss Earth's fatal flight. Stolen painting found by tree. Doctor testifies in horse suit. Sisters reunited after 18 years in checkout line at supermarket. Youth girl does well in dog show. New directions for women. Notice how each sentence brings up two totally different scopes of experience in your mind, based on two very different meanings, categorizations, of the same set of words. Also, notice your feeling state after reading these amusing headlines. Besides the enjoyment, I would describe it as a kind of bubbly movement, a pleasant ambiguity, a readiness to find multiple meanings in almost any situation. That is a very useful state whenever you are doing any kind of problem solving. Telling jokes, even if they are not very good ones, is a way to access this state of ambiguity and readiness to find a new understanding in both the client and in yourself, even when the content of the jokes is irrelevant to the problem someone has. If you watch a videotape or read a transcript of Virginia's satire, you will find that she makes lots of jokes, often about herself, but usually about all of us, about the human condition. Her frequent humor was a powerful element of her amazingly effective work with families. Frank Farrelly is another great example of someone who uses a lot of humor, as shown in the excerpts provided in the previous chapter. In contrast, seriousness, even about serious things, makes it much harder to find a recategorization that could provide a solution to a problem. Unfortunately, most therapists are much too serious, often because they want to match their clients' experience and empathize with them. At other times, they are afraid to lose rapport. Often they become hypnotized by their clients into seeing their problems the way they see them, and is the only way to see them, a poor place from which to be creative in offering them new possibilities. Often they become hypnotized by their clients into seeing their problems the way they see them, and as the only way to see them, a poor place from which to be creative in offering them new possibilities. Humor, creativity, and ambiguity are other names for the invigorating and enjoyable readiness to playfully understand events in a new way. Summary. Recategorizing at a higher logical level introduces a more general category, and this allows the widest latitude in introducing new criteria. The criteria for the more general category become criteria for the existing category by the principle of inheritability. A more general category includes other categories in addition to the original one, and this associates the original category with them. Exaggerate categorical scope. The fundamental presuppositions of any therapy or change method are at a higher logical level. Categorizing every aspect of that approach, both verbal and nonverbal. For instance, most therapies are based on the medical model of fighting disease or the religious view of fighting evil. Both presuppose a battle of opposites. In contrast, several NLP presuppositions make it possible to ally with the client in order to jointly find new alternatives. The NLP presupposition of positive intent makes it possible to avoid battles and ally with someone's intent in a search for alternative to destructive behaviors. The presupposition that people always make the best choice available to them bypasses blame for past destructive behavior and presupposes that someone can learn to understand and behave differently in the future. Model of the world interventions establish a separation between how an event appears and how it really is, making room for alternate alternate ways of understanding. Model of the world. Interventions establish a separation between how an event appears and how it really is, making room for alternate ways of understanding. Cognitive qualifiers like interestingly, curiously, or understandably create a category of interest in understanding exactly how something happens, in contrast to focusing on the unhappiness that results from it. This often leads to understanding how it could happen differently. As if, before we begin, and crazy are all particularly useful unreality categories that can free us from the constraints and consequences of reality that often limits us from even considering change. Averse recategorization enlists someone's criteria to avoid troublesome behaviors that they previously engaged in. Recategorization has its limits, but most of those are in the mind of the person doing the recategorization, limiting the alternatives that they can think of trying. When a client rejects a categorization, you can simply try another one or apologize if necessary. Humor and creativity utilize all the same kinds of changes in scope and categorization that we have been exploring throughout this book. Using humor, even if it is not very good and irrelevant to the changes someone wants to make, activates and elicits the processes of change in scope and category that are at the heart of change. And this is true for both therapist and client. Wit is the sudden marriage of ideas, which before their union were not perceived to have any relation. Mark Twain. Chapter Lust. Closing note. Art is never finished, only abandoned. Leonardo da Vinci. I agree with that. We have examined the basic principles of scope and category, how they interact, and some of the many ways that you can use this information to change your experience and the experience of others. Some of the early parts of this book may have seemed somewhat plodding and technical at times, but the day-to-day, real-life applications of change in scope and category are endless. Every hour of every day presents many opportunities to put this information to work for you in making your life better. If you practice and become fluent in change and meaning, you can also apply these skills in extraordinary events. Ernst Bayer has written about his experiences soon after being captured and put into a German concentration camp in World War II. When a prisoner from another barracks confronted him and demanded half of his tiny ration of bread, saying, "I want half of your bread, and if you don't give it to me, I'll tell the Germans that you are a German Jew." Pause and put yourself in bear's position, which seems to be either or and no win. If you don't give the prisoner half of your bread, you will be denounced and killed. If you do give him half your bread, you will starve to death even faster than you are already. How can you respond in order to save your life? What could you say? Here's how Bear responded. I can't believe I heard you right. You sure look like a decent fella. I know that hunger can make beasts out of all of us, but so soon? The prisoner stared at him for several seconds and then left, and he didn't denounce Beer. Why was this brief response effective in saving his life? Knowing what you have learned about scope and categorization, pause to review Beer's response and notice the different scopes and levels of categorization in it. Rather than responding at the logical level of the demand for bread, where he would have had to choose between the either-or alternatives the prisoner presented, he responded by categorizing the prisoner's communication at higher logical level. First, Beer says that I can't believe that I heard you right, giving the prisoner an opportunity to clarify, restate, or revise his communication. Then he changed the scope to the prisoner himself rather than his demand, and categorized him in a friendly way. You sure look like a decent fella is a more general category that is incompatible with his demand for bread, offering him an implicit either-or choice between being a decent fellow or following through with his demand. When he said, I know that hunger can make beasts out of all of us, he categorized the demand as one example of the more general category of hunger, making beasts of men. This redirected the prisoner's thinking away from the specific demand, and at the same time gave him an acceptable rationale for having made the demand, normalizing it. And he also joined with the prisoners by including himself in this larger categorization by saying all of us, avoiding any conflict or opposition. Finally, he asks, but so soon? Indicating that if the prisoner is to follow through with his demand, it should be later. Probably none of these meanings became fully conscious to the prisoner who demanded bread, but they had their effect. The understanding of scope and category reveals levels of communication that are hidden to most people, making it possible to respond with choice and creativity with choice and creativity, often completely outside other awareness. Volume 2 of this book extends this process by applying the fundamental understandings of scope and category to some additional communication patterns that are more subtle, obscure, and complex than simple categorization and recategorization. Below are the chapter titles of the next book. First, implication, saying without saying. Second, negation, not this nor that. Third, Judgment, the trap of good and bad. Fourth, modes of operating, basic attitudes. 5. Self-reference, circularity. 6. Self-contradiction, yes and no. 7. Logical paradox, self-reversal. 8. Certainty, the unholy grail. 9. Double binds, narrowing choice. 10. Metaphor, overlapping bundles. 11. Forgiveness, a client session. Although all these patterns can be understood using scope and category, most people are unaware of them and use them or respond to them, mostly unconsciously. Like all such patterns, they can be used in positive ways, and many of them were essential elements in the work of Milton Erickson and other effective therapists. But they can also occur in the painful and confusing communication traps that people often find themselves in. Understanding how these patterns work makes it possible to recognize them and help yourself and others out of them, enhancing your life and the lives of others. If I have been able to see farther, it was only because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Sir Isaac Newton. The end of the book, of the first part.